Delight Your Marriage, episode 18.
Welcome to the Delight Your Marriage podcast, the show where you hear from amazing and inspiring wives sharing their struggles, triumphs, and advice for this journey called marriage. Here's your host, Belah Rose.
Hey there, and welcome. This is Belah Rose. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I just want to ask you to consider for a moment. You saw the title. It's about not letting your past get in the way of your present intimacy in your marriage. And I think so often we feel badly about either things that we've done or honestly things that have been done to us where that it wasn't fair and we were maybe the victim of something that was really not okay. But also there are things that we have done in our past that have affected us. And, you know, it just makes us feel unworthy of what God is doing in our lives now and today. I am so excited to share with you Chris's story. Now, Chris Taylor from theforgivenwife.com has just an incredible story to share about how God has transformed her marriage from something that was honestly just so lonely and sad and cold, isolating. But you'll hear in her story that God wasn't done with her. Even though she felt guilt about her past, even though there were things she felt like she didn't deserve, you know what? God was not done with her. He wanted her to have a good and fulfilling marriage, and I want you to know He wants that for you as well. So go ahead and dive into this, listen to what Chris has to share, and I just believe that this is going to help so many marriages. She's so brave to share how she had to really change the way she was thinking in her marriage, and thank God, because it's really cool what has happened. So listen in, and I'll talk to you on the other side. All right, welcome back, Delight Your Marriage listeners. I am really thrilled to have Chris Taylor on the show today from The Forgiven Wife. And she writes at forgivenwife.com, and she's just got a great story. And we're going to dive into so much about her marriage and her life right now. So Chris, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This is nice.
Good. Well, I'm really thrilled, and it's going to be great. May I ask you if you could just introduce yourself and your family and kind of what your day-to-day life looks like?
Well, my day-to-day life, I don't really know what it's like. We've been in so much transition the past year or so. I live in southeastern Wisconsin with my husband, Doug, and we have 3 young adult kids. One is away at school and informs us that she doesn't need to live with us because she is all grown up now and she can take care of things. And it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And then I have 2 sons who right now live with us, but they're both trying to move out. So, you know, family life is in transition. I lost my job a year ago, which was difficult, but it also opened up all sorts of time and space for me to do more ministry work, more writing, more editing. So right now I, teach one class at a local college, and I spend a lot of time online reading and writing and doing editing work. So my day-to-day life is, I'm still trying to figure out what that is.
Yeah.
But it's fun, and I like having the time, and it's nice to be at home to do that.
I love that. And I'm sure so many that are listening can relate to that, because I feel like I could point to almost any point in my life and be like, well, that was a transition time.
My whole life is transition.
Yeah, it really is. And, that is what life is. And that's why our relationship with God is so important, because we can trust Him in the midst of, wow, things are moving all the time. But I'm just grateful that you're sharing so openly, because I really think that people can relate with that. Now, would you share a little bit about you and your husband's personalities?
Oh my gosh, that's such a funny question, because we are totally opposite in every possible way.
Wow.
We've both done the like Myers-Briggs type indicators, and I'm INFP and he's ESTJ. So total opposites.
Wow.
We're at opposite ends of the spectrums politically. We have, I'm an extreme introvert. He's an extreme extrovert. I mean, it's just, together we make a very fully fleshed out one person, but we are, we are completely opposite in so many ways, but that's been very good for both of us. He likes to live in the present, and I'm one who wants to anticipate all the possible things that could happen and
Right.
plan for how we're going to deal with certain things. And he says, "Why are you spending all that energy thinking about something that we might not ever have to think about?" Well, because then I'll be prepared.
Right.
So it's so strange sometimes, and people look at us. How did you two end up together? Well, we flush each other out, so it works. And we make each other laugh, and that is the one thing that just pulled us both to each other was sense of humor, and that he is the only person who's ever made me laugh like he does.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you shared that that's really together you are very like as if your strengths kind of fit into each other's strengths and weaknesses fit into each other, kind of like what a team should be, really. Mm-hmm.
What he doesn't do well, I do very well, and vice versa. And our kids have benefited because they have, not grown up thinking there's one single way to be.
Yeah.
And they've pulled from both of us. And, we can look at each of the kids and see how there are bits and pieces of each of us in that unique human being. And,
yes.
It certainly has challenges, though, to be so opposite from each other. But at the same time, we can see how that has been an amazing part of how God has put us together and how we benefit from that. But it isn't
That's
easy.
amazing. Yeah. Well, it sounds like also, I mean, you write, and so you're very intellectual in terms of you're a thinker and you process and analytical. And it's interesting. It's not as though I'm imagining your husband is similar if you have polar opposite political views even. No, what is he like in terms of?
He talks. I mean, he's a talker.
Okay.
And I'm a writer. I am the one who's very self-aware. Everything I write in my blog, I'm able to pull back exactly what I was thinking and feeling, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'll say, "Honey, how did you feel when I did such and such last week?" And he'll say, "Honey, I don't think deep thoughts like that. That's not me. That's you. You tell me what I thought." And so, and I process everything visually and through, lots of thinking and introspection and self-awareness. And he talks through things, which just interferes. So, if he wants to share something that he sees online, he'll read it to me out loud. And then I have to take it from him and read it for myself visually because I cannot process what I'm hearing.
Wow.
But, we've made it work.
Yeah. No, I love that. Well, it's wonderful. That's the reason I asked this question is because I think so often in our marriages, we think we're the only ones that are going through whatever difficulty it is. And so especially personalities, sometimes, you get married and you get a couple years into your marriage and you're like, oh my gosh, we are total opposites. And you think that's a huge negative thing. Whereas I love that you frame it in a way of we together can complement each other and make a great life together. I love that.
Well, it is how God has helped us be whole, I think.
Yeah, I love that. So this podcast is all about inspiring and empowering wives in their marriages. So I'd love if you could share a scripture or a quote that's meant a lot to you over the years or even recently.
Well, I have. I always find myself going back to the Psalms when I'm, undergoing a great deal of stress over something. It's always the Psalms that I turn to. They inspire me, they comfort me, and they remind me that I'm not the only one who has problems sometimes and is dealing with anger and frustration toward God. And the Psalms always help me feel better about those feelings. But the one that I think, well, there are two actually, but the one that really stands out the most is from Psalm 30, it's verse 11. You turned my wailing into dancing, and you removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy. And when I think about my marriage, there was so much time when I was miserable, and God has turned that wailing and mourning I was doing for so many years about the sad state of our marriage, and He's turned that into joy. And it sort of just captures what God has done in our marriage. The other one that really stands out is Psalm 51, verse 10, and that is, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. And that one speaks to what God did, not within our marriage, but within me. Because so much of what changed through our marriage and the means that God used to turn my wailing into dancing was by helping me have a clean heart and opening my heart and transforming it into what it should have been all along. So those two verses are just, they speak the most to what I've gone through the last few years, I think.
Oh, wow. Well, you've definitely piqued my interest into the story. So I'm really glad that we can move into that next, because how this really applies to your marriage. And I just love your humility in how, you mentioned how you lived and how you are now, how you've changed. I mean, I know when I was married before my current marriage, and I know when I was in that terrible place in my marriage, I was so defensive about how I was living and how I was acting, because I was just so insecure. I mean, that was all I was trying to justify myself and trying to act like I was right the whole time. And no, there are so many things I think God has been kind to reveal to me now that I completely did wrong and made mistakes and these kinds of things. But I just love that you were able to stay in the marriage and make huge changes and come out on the other side, which is incredible.
Yeah, it really has been. I like to think it's because I did certain things, but really it was God, because I certainly couldn't have turned this marriage around by myself.
Wow. Amen. That's awesome. Cool. Well, can we jump right in then? I'd love to hear about a difficult season or struggle in your marriage, and, for the benefit of those that are going through the same things, really. But yeah, go right ahead.
Well, we've been married in April. We have our 24th anniversary. So we've been married, almost a quarter century. And for the first nearly 20 years, so 2 decades of our marriage, it wasn't that it was awful, but it was not good and it was not healthy. And the problem, when I look back, I see that the real problem was the lack of intimacy. And I don't just mean that as a euphemism for sex. Neither one of us was fully sharing ourselves with each other. And it became this sort of crazy cycle. I brought in to the marriage a whole lot of sexual baggage. I had horrible self-esteem as a young woman. And the only time I ever got any attention from guys was when they were interested in sex. So I went through a phase in college when I was very promiscuous. And felt very much like damaged goods. So even once I got to the point of thinking, wow, this isn't good for me and I shouldn't be doing this, I felt like I had lost the right to have anything better. And that was the young woman who came into this relationship with my husband, somebody who didn't feel she believed, that she deserved anything better. Some of my, I can't really even call them relationships, we weren't calling them hookups then, but that's pretty much what some of those things were. And I had learned all these horrible lessons about sex, that sex is for men, that sex is not about emotional connection, that it's something that I can do that gives me power over somebody else, and that it's the only thing of value in me. So, I meet this guy who is from a very godly family with parents who have a good marriage and are affectionate with each other. And he has a mother who's not not that she's not emotional at all, but she has a fairly even temper. And he ends up with this woman whose emotions are all over the map. I always say I live my life on an emotional landscape. My feelings drive everything. And so there's this, broken down, self-worth damaged woman with this guy who's basically a decent guy and fairly healthy, and neither one of us knew what to do with the other. And every time, he would initiate sex, I needed that emotional connection. I needed to feel it, not physically, but I needed to feel in my heart that he loved me not just for sex, but his initiation would be things like, well, I'm horny, or do you wanna? Well,
Right.
no, I want you to make me want it.
Right.
But the process of me saying that made him feel rejected. So we kind of got on this horrible merry-go-round that just became this sort of, tornado where it just got worse and worse and worse. And, there was one year when we had what was, clinically speaking, when experts say there's a sexless marriage, it means that there is sex 10 or fewer times a year. And there was one year when we hit that. And sexual frequency was, maybe once a month, maybe twice a month. So frequency was bad. He always knew that there was likely to be a no more than a yes. It never occurred to me that sex was for me too. And then even when I would, cave in and have sex with him, I would barely participate. I was resistant. He had to do all the work. I would be lying back doing my grocery list in my head, waiting for him to get done.
Oh, no. Yes.
And it was, so, it was just this horrible thing. And it finally, his industry got hit hard by the economy. So in 2008, 2009, he lost his job. And then over the next several years, he had several jobs that didn't last because, the dominoes of the economy were kind of falling down, and he just kind of happened to be, last one hired is first one fired. So he was unemployed for a great deal out of a 5-year period. So he was home feeling depressed, and he started to lose even an interest in sex, and he stopped even trying to initiate, which kind of created some space for me to start thinking, well, something's going on. And he stopped laughing, and I stopped laughing. And, I would read these articles that would say, well, what was it that drew you to your husband in the first place? And I would think, well, we laughed, but we don't do that anymore. Something's broken. Something's wrong. And we were just miserable. And I think we probably would have ended up divorced if we had continued the way things had been going. Although I think it would have been just as likely for us to stay and be platonic roommates and barely even have a friendship. We were both very lonely in our marriage, both of us. So it was a very difficult time, and, we would have these talks about sex, and he would, for such an unself-aware guy, he revealed so much of his heart to me. And instead of me thinking, wow, he's really sharing his heart, I would think, oh, he's really digging deep to try to make me feel guilty and make me have sex. And I would just, the more he would open himself up and be vulnerable, the more I would build up these walls between us, because I thought it was only about sex, and that I expected, I had expected all these other guys in my past to value me only for sex. I wanted more from my husband, and he wasn't giving me that, which now I understand was because he was feeling so rejected, and he couldn't be that vulnerable with somebody who he felt was rejecting him. I mean, it was just this awful spiral where it just got worse and worse and worse as it went on. But we were both lonely and miserable. So our season of, our difficult season of marriage lasted nearly 2 decades.
Wow. My goodness. I'm just so grateful that you're sharing this story, and I thank you so much for being open with it, because it is not uncommon, which is, I'm interested in how you were able to kind of shift things. What was the catalyst that kind of made things start moving in a different direction?
Well, I think once I recognized that he was depressed and he stopped pursuing me, I think that gave me a little bit of space to not constantly feel on edge, like I was constantly having to protect myself against his advances. Heaven forbid I do anything that might give him any ideas that he wants to have sex, because, that would be horrible. So when he stopped the pursuit, I began to think about things. And, I think God had been working on me for a long time, and I finally just got worn down enough that I couldn't resist God anymore.
Yeah.
And my heart had begun to soften. At one point, I remember standing there looking at my husband and thinking, yeah, it would really be nice to have a good marriage, but I don't deserve that. After all the things that I did as a young woman, in the promiscuity, I just, the guilt was just weighing me down, and I thought I don't deserve a good marriage. And it suddenly hit me, but maybe he does. And it's not really fair that I'm dragging him down with my guilt.
Wow.
And I didn't know what to do with that feeling, but it was there. And then, this whole thing I had just built these walls up, not just between me and my husband, but between me and God. So I didn't even want to go to church. I didn't want to pray because, God had taken my husband's job away. God had made my husband a sex-crazed maniac, and God probably didn't love me anyway. So one Sunday morning, Doug went to church without me because we'd had a huge sex fight the night before. And he went to church, and I was sitting on the living room couch online. I think I pulled up, I was on CNN's website or something, and there was this article about Christians having sex. And I thought, after all that he's whined about sex, maybe I need to think about trying to do something different. I don't have a clue what that would mean, but maybe I'll at least read the article, and maybe I was thinking, maybe it'll give me something to convince him that he's wrong. But I'll at least look at the articles. And one of the little sidebar articles linked to the discussion forums at the Marriage Bed website with Paul and Lori Byerly's website. And I went on there and looked at one particular thread, and it was all, people sharing, people whose spouses had rejected them sexually, talking about what it was like and sharing different, metaphors and analogies, and, I'm in a sinking boat, and they were sharing their hearts. They were saying the exact same things that Doug had been telling me for years, but somehow seeing not just that other people were saying the same thing, but seeing that this was the volume, the number of people saying the same thing. It just hit me that was, I had not had this empathy for my husband. I had not been able to see things from his perspective until I heard his words from other voices. And reading those things and the sheer pain that came through, I ended up sobbing on the living room floor, completely broken. It hit me so hard what I had done. And I had no idea what to do. It's like, okay, now I have killed my husband's heart. How do I even start now? And that was where God was right there. The moment that I was broken was the moment that I started healing. And I didn't know how to turn it around. But I looked, and I thought, I can do one thing. I can do one thing today. What is it? And I spent a lot of time really considering the things that he'd complained about over the years. Sexual frequency was a big issue. But the thing that really had stood out was that for all this time, he had said I could live with sex just once a month if you were really there for it. And none of this lie back and wait for it to be over while I do my grocery list. And I thought, okay, I'll work on that. That's the one thing I'll start with. It was his biggest complaint, so I thought if I can try to become more present for sex, that will at least be one thing that he can't complain about anymore, and maybe that will make him less depressed, and maybe that will make things better. And it did. I worked one little baby step at a time, and I failed more than I succeeded, but I kept at it. And eventually, I got so that I was not only able to participate in sex. I was able to do it very well and feel confident about it. And then I could look at the next thing, and then the next thing after that. And it was really, God just kept me being persistent, and He never let me forget that moment of being broken and sobbing on my living room floor. So many times I wanted to give up and that I failed, but I always thought back to that moment of where my heart just broke down and realized what I had been doing to my husband. And the remembering of that was what gave me the persistence to keep going. And, I think the first 6 months, I don't know, my husband noticed, but he didn't think it was on purpose. He was afraid to say anything because he might jinx it,
Yes.
Maybe she doesn't realize what she's doing, but as soon as I point it out, she'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll stop now."
Right. I didn't mean to give you that impression.
No, heaven forbid. So the first 6 months were very difficult because he was not, he was not responding or acting any differently than he always had. Only me.
Wow.
The second 6 months were even harder because then he realized that I was doing it on purpose, and he started to feel a little safer in really expressing some of those feelings he'd repressed. So his anger at me, his sadness, it all became safe to express. And he was really difficult to be around because he kept thinking, if you can do this now, why couldn't you do this 10 years ago? When I was begging you, why couldn't you do it then? So that first year, if it weren't for God pulling me through and keeping that memory of that brokenness, I would have given up many times. But after the first year, we laughed again. And then I knew it was all going to be okay. And there's been so much growth since that first year. But it was when we were laughing together again and we're back at that relationship that we'd had when we'd first met. That's when I knew that what I had done really had made a difference.
Oh my gosh. I'm just blown away, Chris.
God broke me and picked me back up, and it was that first year was so very hard. But now it's so different. And, it's the story of my marriage, but it's really the story of all these different things God did to draw me closer to Him. Because all those walls I'd had up between me and my husband, there were even bigger walls between me and God. And even since I've worked on things in the marriage, God has kept working on me, and He's used, the sex was the thing that put these walls up between me and God in the first place. Yet that is the same thing that God has used to pull me back to Him. So sort of the thing that drove the wedge between us has built the bridge back. And it's just, it's been amazing. And, our marriage now is just, it's not that it's perfect. We still, we have arguments, and there are still times when we get on each other's nerves. And, we've recently moved, so there's a lot of stress, and neither one of us is at our best. But the difference is that instead of having those things push us further apart, we know that those things are happening on a foundation of intimacy and health. And so, we bicker a little bit, and we, aren't happy with each other, but then we know that we're able to come back together, sexually and otherwise.
Right.
And that kind of pulls us back and regrounds us in what our marriage is. And then everything's okay again.
Wow.
Well,
go ahead.
So say this marriage that we were both so lonely in has just become such a source of joy and comfort for both of us.
My goodness. Wow. Well, there's so many wonderful keys that you shared, and I take notes when I record these interviews, and already it's completely filled. I can't even mention everything I want to, just of how grand, how marvelous each of these points are. And it's clear you've thought a lot about this and processed so well. But the fact that you were in a marriage for 20 years and had a status quo and had, this is the way I interact in my marriage, this is our pattern, this is our culture we've developed over 2 decades, to be able to change that. I mean, my gosh, not only to be able to change what you've done for 20 years, which takes a lot of humility, a lot of being willing to just accept and push through and keep going and trust God that things are going to shift eventually. But for a year, for it to have been so difficult to process your husband, I mean, I'm just so grateful that you shared that, especially because I think sometimes we think that, well, I made a change, so he's got to, step up. Now I'm ready for the response, the feedback, the positive stuff.
Exactly. I've finally given him what he's been begging me for, so why isn't he happy?
Right.
Well, I very much can look at my process of growth and my healing, and I can see that. But what I think it's so easy for women in my situation to not remember is that husbands heal too. Amen. And that just as my healing is a process, yes, so is his. And his healing couldn't even start until he realized that I was doing this on purpose and that it wasn't just a fluke that was going to go away. So I think, Doug's healing didn't really begin until 6 months in. And that anger and frustration that I got from him, those were the first pieces of his healing. And somehow, I persisted. And I think even then, God was letting me know that this was part of what my husband needed to go through in order to get to a place where we could be okay. Yeah. But it is really hard, and I hear from women all the time, I've been doing this, and it's been 6 weeks, and he's no different.
Right.
Well,
right.
Okay, sweetie, keep it up another 6 months, and then, and the thing is, we can't do things. We can't go through this change to get our husbands to change, because that's on our husbands. Their healing is their business. What I needed to do, as soon as I realized what I had done to my husband, I knew that I needed to do something differently, even if it was too late and too little.
Right.
I knew that God was telling me that I needed to be a different kind of wife, and I needed to do that regardless of Doug's response. And this is the hardest thing I've done in my life, wow, and it was completely worth it. But it was hard. It was really, really hard for a year. And then it wasn't as hard, and it's gotten easier since then. So, I still have occasional moments when he'll say something in a way that just makes me bristle, and I'm thinking, really? That's what you want? I just need to have some emotional cuddling, and this.
Right.
And so, I still have those responses that start to bubble up in me, but
right,
I learned to move past them, and I no longer let my feelings drive my actions like I did. And I can say to him, honey, I'm really having a hard time processing the words that you just used. I know your intentions were good. Can you just give me a few minutes and help me settle down, and then we can proceed. And because he knows that that's not me trying to put things off, that it really is going to happen, he's happy to do that for me.
Yeah.
It's not just another ploy of me trying to say something that's going to push him off, which is what he always thought it was before.
Right.
So, as wives, we need to do what we need to do because it's what God expects of us and what God wants us to be as wives. And I think over time, our marriages can change, and over time, our husbands can relax. Yeah. But it does take a lot of time and a lot of persistence and a lot of grace for ourselves and for our spouses.
Yep. And I love that you mentioned the change being such a process. And not only was it the year of significant challenge, but then even after that, here and there, you still have to push through, even now. And I think anyone who's had a significant transformation, maybe you started out in a difficult spot, growing up, maybe there were some challenges or abuses and that kind of thing, and you've had to change your personality. I mean, I struggled with bulimia for years, and so that change didn't happen overnight, even though the actual actions changed overnight. I did stop that habit, but there's still, even now, there's still different thought processes that I have to
Right.
recognize. Now that's unhealthy. That's not right. That's not godly. That's not God honoring. And I have to still conform to his image, even years later.
And those scripts, I don't think those scripts ever completely leave our heads.
Mm,
They're there. The
yeah.
difference is that I now have new scripts to push back against those old bad ones from
That's
the
right.
enemy.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's not as easy as other times. And so, I'm good at giving myself some grace and recognizing that, it is a process. And
Yeah.
it's okay that you stumbled and you wanted to say no, or that you really didn't feel like you weren't fully engaged this time.
Right.
It's okay that happens sometimes, as long as you're getting back up, get back in the saddle, so to speak,
Right.
and
Right.
do better next time. And
Mm-hmm.
my husband also, there are still times when he won't be completely honest about what he wants,
Right.
because there's still this part of him that says she won't agree to it, or
Mm-hmm.
she wouldn't want to have sex anyway, because I taught him that over those 2 decades. He learned
Mm-hmm.
that no is the default response, and I can't expect him to unlearn those things any more than I can expect me to completely unlearn everything else. It's a process, and we're just both in such a different spot, but that doesn't mean that that those old habits aren't underneath there wanting to bubble up.
Yeah. Yeah. And one part I wanted to just pull out from your story is sex was the thing that drove me away from God. And it's also the thing that brought me back to him. I mean, that's just so brilliant. And I think that is definitely my story, because of my promiscuous past prior to being married the second time, and just having all these hurt feelings towards God about it. So I just love that. I'd love for you to kind of go into that a little bit more, that how sex actually brought you to God, because I think a lot of times women still have this mentality that, well, sex is bad and sex shouldn't be part of my life and I shouldn't really be enjoying it and da da da. I mean, how did you kind of get into something else?
Well, I didn't have an upbringing that, my parents didn't really say much about sex. So, I didn't grow up with any of this teaching that says that sex is ungodly.
Yeah.
My parents didn't say anything one way or the other about whether I should save sex for marriage.
Oh, okay.
So, I felt a lot of guilt, but I think a lot of that was more cultural, at least I thought. But, now I'm looking at God was trying to press these things on my heart, and I just didn't know that was God.
Yeah.
So, and actually this realization that was, the tool that was the wedge became the tool that was the healing. I realized that last week. I was writing something. I woke up and I just had this stuff I needed to write, and I was writing this down, and all of a sudden it just hit me.
Wow.
How amazing God is, that the very thing that I had let push me away from God was the thing that God used to just pull me back.
Yeah.
And it was the promiscuous sex that drove me away.
Right.
Or that I let pull me away. It wasn't anything driving me away. It was me really feeling unworthy of being in God's presence, because I was so dirty and bad and damaged.
Right.
And when I began to work on sex in my marriage, I always had thought, well, let's work on the relationship, and once the relationship's fine, then sex will just be a natural thing. And I was a perfect example of somebody who said, act first, and the belief and the feeling will follow. And it really, I think, was 2.5 years into the process when I got really settled enough into the sexual intimacy in our marriage, and that was really healed, that I could see God pulling me towards him, and I could see that it wasn't really about the marriage all along. It was really God wanted me to heal the marriage because He wanted to pull me closer to Him.
Amen. That's so
And
true.
it was just one of those things where, little pieces of things started to pull together. And, I think, my journey of change and transformation started in, it was September 2010. And it was just about 2 years ago now. It was April 2013 that I started the blog. And, I remember sitting there thinking, I could completely unprepared to do this, and I was thinking about Moses being told to go talk to Pharaoh, but God, who am I?
Yeah.
And I thought, oh yeah, I'm so like Moses.
Right.
But those words from Exodus were coming, but who am I? I don't have the words.
Right.
And what I heard from God was, I have prepared you. And I thought, what are you talking about? Well, then I was able to look back at all these different things in my life, and the times when I had been talking to other young women about their relationships and counseling and encouraging them. I thought about all the different, what volunteer work I had done in my life that I'd found most meaningful was in helping women. I did some volunteer work with women in high-risk pregnancies because I had spent 3.5 months on bed rest when I was pregnant with my twins. And I did some online support for women with gynecological health problems. So I could see all these little things, and then God reminded me, you have a master's degree in writing. Why do you think I did that?
Oh, yeah.
And my career that I'd had for, since the late 1980s, I was a writing teacher, a college writing instructor. And I thought, well, duh, all these pieces that I always thought that I was just sort of, wishy-washy and flitting from one thing to another. And now I can see that those are all different pieces of things that God had to put into place so that I could do this. And, I when I started the blog, I thought, I'm fine now. I'm finished. I'm a finished product. I can sit there and do this.
Right.
I think I have grown more with God since starting the blog than I did before then.
Yeah.
I think the blog is for me and not for anyone else.
Praise God. Yes. Yes. I hear that. Mm-hmm.
So all these different pieces of things, and as I've written about sexual intimacy in marriage, I have experienced so many moments of self-awareness and my relationship with God. And so it's just, it amazes me that I'm writing something, and my prayer with every single blog post is that at least one woman have her heart touched by what I'm writing.
Yeah.
And there are times that I'll write something and I'll get no comments and, no shares on Facebook or Twitter. And I sit there and I think, wow, that was a dud. And then 3 months later, I'll get an email from some woman who says, I just ran across this, and I have to tell you that post changed my life.
Oh, my goodness.
And that just blows me away. And I'm so amazed and humbled that God lets me be part of that.
Yes.
And that's just, who am I to get to be part of anybody else's healing? I just, being God's tool.
Yes.
It's an amazing thing. Yeah. And at the same time, there are other posts when I don't get any feedback at all, but I know that I gained something from the writing of it.
That's too funny.
And God reminds me, every post will touch at least one woman, and sometimes it's okay if that one woman is you.
Yeah. Oh.
So I am my own audience sometimes.
Yes, and it's funny. I know that there's just so many books and things that I've read myself that have changed my life that I might have told all my girlfriends, but I've never reached out to the author. So
well, and that's just it. Sometimes we hear from people, but there are so many more people who never respond.
Yes.
Who we don't know. We don't know who we're reaching, but God does.
So well put, Chris. We don't know who we're reaching, but God does. So if you can hear my voice right now, God knows your name. He's got a plan for your life, and He loves you so deeply. And He knows you're listening to this. This is part of His plan. It's not a mistake that you're here right now. I just want to encourage you, if there were some pieces of Chris's story that ring true for you, I just encourage you to hold those in your heart, ponder them, pray about them, consider them. If you've been holding back from intimacy with your husband, now's the time to indulge a little bit more, to jump into the ocean, to stop standing on the sidelines, but get in there and engage. And you just don't know what God's going to do on the other side. I mean, look, Chris really persisted and battled and went for it. And for a year, it was hard. It was really hard. And yet, look what's happened. Look at what has happened, what God has done through her persistence, the grace that He has given her for the work that she has also done. I'm just so grateful for her story. And the next episode, episode 19, actually, will be the second half, and Chris has just so many more insights to share. You can tell she's quite a deep thinker, and she just really lays it out next time about the reason she thinks her marriage has survived and the way it looks today. And she's got a pretty great intimacy tip that I don't want you to miss. The other thing I'd like to mention, now I know this is a longer episode, thanks for sticking with me, but today is the webinar I've been talking about, the specifics of Peni, which is oral sex in the context of marriage. Now, this is a webinar only for wives, so ladies, please come on. It's Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can find out more information at delightyourmarriage.com/14. I would love to have you. There's a bunch of ladies already signed up. I've gotten some emails. I mean, there is some excitement about this, and honestly, I am excited. I feel like as I was preparing for this webinar, God just downloaded so much insight. You know, when you take that step of faith, it's a little scary, but you just start and you go for it. God so honors that. I've just found it time and time again. I'm a little scared. I go for it anyway. I pray about it while I'm doing it, and then God just honors it. So I'm really excited. I hope you can join me. It's 8:00 tonight, and if you're not in Eastern Standard Time, just figure out the conversion, whatever. Sign up, and I will see you soon. If you're listening to this in the future, I'm hoping that I will have another one. So again, go to delightyourmarriage.com/14. And we will talk soon, my friend. Thank you so much for your open heart when you listen to these podcasts. I know it takes a lot to really hear a story and let it get inside of you and let God transform you through it. But I believe today was an opportunity to do that. If you need to listen to it again and hear the pain and the trials that Chris went through and see what God wants to do in your own life and marriage, I'd say go for it. But until next time, I love you. I'm praying for you, and God, that He would just bless your marriage and your life, and most of all, your walk with Him. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening. Stop by delightyourmarriage.com to check out all the show notes, as well as many more resources and articles. Until next time, live with love, wisdom, and passion.